Noah Wilson took the business card, glanced at it, and was dumbfounded. Fredman Wilson, chairman of Future Company Group? This Future Company Group is a very famous listed group. Noah Wilson was happy and hurriedly said, "Oh, it turned out to be Fredman Wilson, who has admired his name for a long time." After speaking, he hurriedly explained, "Fredman Wilson, what is the relationship between your father and my father?" My father, an old master, had already driven Hexie more than 3 years ago. Fredman Wilson sighed and said, "Oh, that's really unfortunate. My father just left last year." Before leaving, he still wanted to see the Savior. "I didn't expect the benefactor to go one step ahead of him." Speaking of this, Fredman Wilson said with emotion, "It is estimated that these old brothers have been away for decades, and maybe they meet again over there." Noah Wilson nodded repeatedly, and said humbly, "Mr. Fredman, please come in and sit down." Fredman Wilson gave a hum, and laughed, "Then bother. Don't disturb, don't disturb." Noah Wilson hurriedly welcomed Fredman Wilson in, walked through the yard and into the living room. He hurriedly said to Mrs. Wilson, "Mom, Chairman of East Cliff Future Company Group and Chairman Fredman Wilson is here." Old Mrs. Wilson was shocked. Future Company Group? This is the famous A-share listed group. How did their chairman find their home? Although she was very puzzled, she still got up very excited to greet him, and said, "Oh, welcome Chairman Wilson to my house. Please forgive me, Lady Wilson, I have missed a long way." "Where?" Fredman Wilson smiled and arched his hands slightly, and suddenly caught a glimpse of Wendy, who had been crying for a long time, with red eyes, heartbroken, and when he glanced over, he suddenly felt that this girl was beautiful and pitiful. It really made him feel pity, and he couldn't help but move. Wendy was in a state of collapse at this time and did not notice that the new guest at home was silently looking at her with his greedy eyes. At this time, the old Mrs. Wilson invited Fredman Wilson to sit and said with excitement, "I didn't expect Fredman Wilson to come to our house. It really made us flourish." "You are polite," Fredman Wilson said with a smile. "You should be the Lady Wilson of the Wilson family, right?" Old Mrs. Wilson hurriedly said, "Fredman can call me Old Mrs. Wilson, don't be so polite." Fredman Wilson nodded and said, "I'm here this time because of the last wish of my dad." After speaking, he told about his father and the Wilson family's old master and their past years. The ancestor of the Wilson family was in a small mountain village in Nongguang province. Almost all in that village were people surnamed Wilson. They belonged to a large family that had developed for hundreds of years. Because the branches and leaves were too large, it had grown to thousands of people. At the time of scale, most of them have been out of the 5 clothes, and the blood relationship is very weak, and it can't even be called a blood relationship. At that time, Fredman Wilson's father and Old Master Wilson were both teenage boys. The 7 or 8 generations of the two were barely relatives, but the two of them had good personal relationships, and they were considered lifelong friendships. Later, after being invaded, the Wilson family ran for their lives in a hurry and fell apart. Fortunately, Fredman Wilson's father had taken his life fortunately for his Mr. Wilson's persistence. Later, everyone was separated in the flames of war, so they had not been able to find each other. Fredman Wilson's father was still thinking about this until his death, so he asked Fredman Wilson to find a way to find his benefactor and come over to thank him. However, Fredman Wilson didn't take it seriously. Although he agreed to his father's wish after his soul left his body, he forgot about the matter. Until a few days ago, he kept having nightmares repeatedly, dreaming that the old master came back to him and complained that his words were not honored. Then he found the fortune-telling master to look at it. The master said that the old master's last wish is strong. If he does not fulfill it for him, he will come to find him in the dream. No way. Fredman Wilson spent money to hire people to look around and found clues to the Orus Hill Wilson family. After hearing this, Mrs. Wilson started to cry with excitement. This is really nowhere to be found. There is still another light in the dark. Future Company Group is a listed group with a market value of tens of billions. Fredman Wilson uses his fingers to help the Wilson family survive from desperation.